Hello, everyone. Welcome to another in a series of webinars from Furyk Digital. My name is Scott Hansen. I'm the AVP of STM Society and Association Business Development for Furyk Digital. In today's webinar, the panel and I will attempt to decode digital trends for publishers. We are thrilled and excited to share the webinar with you. First and foremost, thank you for joining us today. I hope you and your family are keeping safe, sound, and jabbed. On a personal note, I received my booster this week. We have a good number of people joining now, so we'll let people are still coming in. We'll be recording the webinar for those who are unable to be with us live, and also you might want to give it a second listen later on. Before we start, there are a few ground rules. The webinar is going to cover various topics in detail. If you have a question, please feel free to type them in the Q&A section you see at the bottom. And if you'd like to leave us a comment, please do so in the comment section. The webinar will last about an hour, but we're going to try to leave the last 15 to 20 minutes for your questions and comments that we can respond to. Okay, that's it for the housekeeping. I see there's still some people joining on, but we're going to get started. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. We have guest registrants today from Australia, India, Europe, UK, and of course, North America. But thanks again for taking some time to join us. Today's topic is, or rather I should say, our panel's take on a recent research report. The report provides a look into the future of the global digital publishing market and summarizes the results carried out by the Insight Partners Group. The report provides an analysis of the digital publishing market by geography, examines the current market size for digital publishing, defines trends, and presents growth forecasts from now through 2028. The study also provides market insights and analysis of the digital publishing market, highlighting technology trends, market dynamics, and competitive analysis of some of the major players in the industry. To provide commentary and analysis on the information, I have three very special guests with me today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome from Washington, D.C., Christine Charlotte. Christine's the director of ASM Press. It's the American Society for Microbiology. Welcome, Christine. And can you please tell our listeners briefly about your role at ASM?
As the director of ASM Press, I oversee our book publishing business, which since late 2019 has been done in partnership with Wiley. We publish primarily texts in microbiology for upper level undergraduate and graduate level students. We also publish references primarily in clinical microbiology and infectious diseases. And so we've been rather busy in the past year and a half.
Yeah, I'm sure. Also from New York City, and today in upstate New York, Mr. Stephen Hefner. He's the Managing Director of Publications for the IEEE. Welcome, Stephen, and can you please tell our listeners briefly about your role at IEEE?
Thanks, Scott. Yes, Stephen Hefner, Managing Director of our publishing program. The IEEE is a technical professional society with almost 500,000 members worldwide, that the publishing program for which is one of the top 10 publishers of scientific and technical information in the world. We have 200 plus journals, books program, a preprint server, a large magazine collection, and the like. So we also do over 200,000 conference papers a year. In our main subject areas are electrical engineering, computer science, power and energy, and communications.
Thank you. And from Dallas, Texas, Mr. Sri Subramanian. He's the president of Furyk Digital. Welcome, Sri. And can you please tell our listeners about your role at Furyk Digital?
Yep. Thank Thank you, Scott, and it's a pleasure to be on with Christine and Stephen. I am the president of Furyk. I manage business and operations. Furyk has been around for a little over 20 years. We're a global provider of digital content solutions, focusing on education and learning and training. So we work with publishers, associations, enterprise, and educational institutions across the gamut of digital solutions. So everything from creating content, which could be courses or simulations or labs or assessments, to transforming them into various formats for delivery through platforms, to creating a lot of the media that goes with it. And we also have a product, Kitabu, that allows our customers to deliver it digitally to more than 15 million teachers and learners across more than 25 countries. So through that, I think I've been fortunate to be exposed to a variety of kind of business situations, as well as how each country and each segment kind of tackles the unique situation within their segments.
Great. Well, I guess that was quite an intro, but let's get started with our little discussion here. I thought I'd start out with the Insight report states that the global digital publishing market will grow by almost 9% a year through 2028, and revenues will double from around 14 billion to 28 billion. And I guess it's, well, maybe it's not a surprise, but about 90% of the growth in revenue will come from North America, Europe, and APAC, but primarily China and India. So I guess we'll start out. It's a very high-level comment, but what each of you think about that forecast, and are they? You feel like they're accurate, not accurate enough, or?
Happy to take it,
Scott.
Scott.
Want to go first? Yeah.
Sure. 9% is a number that you could probably only get from a consultant. That's a pretty impressive number, and possibly one that is a tad unrealistic in my estimation. A lot of growth in digital publishing has been driven by the transition from print to digital over the past couple of decades, and I think that transformation, while not entirely over, is substantially complete, and we're not going to see significant growth from that transition anymore. So you take that piece out of the equation. The other factor that I think limits growth a little bit in the future is going to be the open movement and open access in journals, but also open educational resources movement, which really is driving money out of the system for content owners. And so that's less money that can be spent on enhancements, on new platforms, et cetera. So I think those are the two limiting factors. The one thing that I will say, though, perhaps for a optimistic growth estimate, is that this is not entirely evenly spread across all the segments. So there are areas in digital publishing where you are going to see aggressive growth like that. And I think that, and Christine will probably talk a little bit about it in education opportunities, but remote learning, handling multimedia better than we do now, custom curriculum, and a couple of other areas around automated curation where we can apply high technology solutions. So I think that there are areas where we'll see 9% and higher growth, but there's a lot of reason to be a little bit more moderate than that, I think.
Christine, any thoughts?
I would agree with Stephen. I don't have the overview because I don't oversee our journals, but I would agree that the transition to digital for journals is complete. And what's going to drive the journals is the open science, open data, open access movement that has really started building the wave. And I know ASM journals are busy working on their business models to be able to sustain the business and the growth that we project in research papers coming into ASM. I would say personally, we have worked very hard to ensure that we have a lot of digital assets with our educational materials, because reading online is becoming just a matter of course for students. And I would say even 5 years ago, people were still wedded to their print textbooks. And that's not so anymore, just because of the access that people can have from their phones or wherever they are, which has really changed in the last 5 years. So I see definite growth. We've been working at putting our resources, references specifically online, instead of just so that they can be updated. And that's the other thing about having a digital presence, is that it's not static. You can go back and enhance as science and practice advances, which is very important to us.
Good. Sri, any comments?
Yeah, I actually fall a little bit on the other side. I'm reminded of Donald Rumsfeld's, I think, speech about the known knowns and the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. McKinsey in the early 90s came up with a now famous study, which basically say mobile phones will never take off, right? And they said, because they said, other than doctors and a few other industries, who's ever going to use mobile phones? Of course, the mobile phone was the size of a large brick then, right? I was also a part of a study and a consultant around 2002 to project exactly like this. We were working for one of the large telecom companies, and we had to project the growth of the telecom industry by counting the players and the needs. So we were talking to consultants, and the technologies then were like ATMs and frame relays. So we were doing a top-down and bottom-up analysis, very similar to the report. And where we ended up was it will largely be flat in 10 years, because, you know, businesses grow, these are the technologies growing and stuff like that. And I left McKinsey soon after, which is just as well, because in 2007, the iPhone came out, right? And I think before 2007 was the iPad. But just a few years later, it came off, and then data and revenues exploded. So I think in this environment, the rate of change, like if you look at how Facebook has hit 1 billion users, and then TikTok is faster, and then something else is faster, what I think will happen is the scope of what is considered digital publishing will expand. And there'll be new players and new ways of delivery, and everybody's creating content, because that's also the way, by the way, you have to do SEO and be discovered as an enterprise. So I think who's a digital publisher will change. And I think it will be much more if you do like a compounded growth rate, but it won't be even, to Stephen's point. I think it'll be like kind of conservative, and then something will change, which we don't know what it is today. And I think it'll more than double, I would say, at least in 10 years.
Well, Sri, you know, it's your business to be, optimistic about this, right? And and maybe for Christine and me, we just don't want somebody to set our goal at 9% a year. So
absolutely. But I think the interesting point, if you look at the biggest companies, like you look at Slack and all these respected companies, Airbnb, all of them were formed after the 2008 crash. So I'm almost guaranteeing, given that education was the big kind of, with schools shut down during pandemic, there are probably stealth startups being formed and started over the last 18 months will probably, and I'm saying we won't, and that's what I'm thinking of. I think there will be really innovative approaches that come from these last 18 months that will be exposed to maybe 2-3 years from now that will change things.
Yeah, you know, I'd like to ask Christine a question, kind of follow up to this, because I think that the point is that not only are these technologies changing, but they're changing actually our revenue stream. So for example, Christine's idea or saying, you know, we're putting more resources online, et cetera, changes who her customer is. It changes that the students are purchasing textbooks to institutions are purchasing curriculum. So there's some unknowns in there about whether how much money is in this system to support those revenues, and what that model will then look like as a subscription model over a transactional model. Maybe Christine, I don't know if you're experiencing that. We certainly experienced that transition at Wolters Kluwer when I was there in the past couple of years around MedEd. So.
I think that's true. One of the pressures that we've faced is that libraries their budgets have been shrinking for years, but now they are looking to opportunities to support more open access and open resources, especially open educational resources. And so that business line of, we used to sell one copy of every book to every library in North America, basically, right? And that has just disappeared. They'll take a digital copy, but it's through a platform and it's based on usage. So they may, if it gets a couple of usages, they may not buy it. So it's very different. And what I hear from librarians is they are not interested in more products that are subscription based. So the business model is changing, like Stephen said. And we have to figure out some very creative ways to continue to be able to support our content development and vetting, which comes at a cost.
The report also talks about the continued, I believe their words were, explosion and adoption of online education, learning, adaptive learning, as well as online corporate training and learning. I know, not make it about Furyk, but Sri and I are working with a lot of our customers. We're going to get into this in a little bit, but especially over the last 18 months, people that were thinking about it, dabbling in it, are definitely, in getting involved, and we're helping them with that. But just curious how Christine and Stephen, how you've seen that growing.
I will say that I've worked with faculty who want to take our course materials, a textbook, and recreate it or re-envision it for an adaptive learning course. And so, as Stephen said, this opens up a new business model for content reuse in a new way. And I think that's really exciting. So there are these large online, primarily universities, for instance, the University of Central Florida, not far from you, Scott, that will have most of its courses online, and they're turning not only to the inclusive access model for access to textbooks, but also allowing or enabling their faculty to create new courses from existing content that better suit the learning styles of the students they're seeing. And so I think that's really exciting. As a publisher, I want to keep control of my content and how it's used, and make sure that we can continue to support our authors in developing that, even though it's being, in some cases, disassembled and reassembled in new ways. So it's exciting, but it's also new ground.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought up, I agree with that. And I'm glad you brought up the continuing education piece, because a lot of our educational work is outside of the academic setting. We're heavily engaged in industry and in corporate settings where working engineers need to develop new skills or are learning new standards, et cetera. So we're actively engaged in kind of multidisciplinary educational ventures where we're talking about engineers in one area learning more about a different engineering area, or a very successful program that has come out of our educational activities has been the IEEE Mini MBA program, where teaching engineers about business, and we're doing that in partnership with Rutgers University. So those kinds of flexible, non-traditional academic syllabi, and then also adding to that Christine's notion there of some sort of customization for that audience is really key for the development of that market.
Yeah, and I think every segment, I think, is tackling with it in their at slightly different speeds. So I think in K-12, especially in the US, it's very controlled. 90% of the schools are public schools. And it's between adoption states and open territories. And sometimes the PTA has to get involved to approve something. So it's a 2-year cycle. I think all the big publishers about maybe 5 years ago said, adaptive learning is the thing. We're all about differentiated instruction. Smart kids and motivated kids who want to really move ahead can do that. I mean, you always had the honors programs and stuff like that, but they were trying to digitally saying this platform will be fully adaptive. If you answer, I'll feed you with more thing and you can move at your own pace. but not many of them succeeded for a couple of reasons, right? One reason they didn't succeed was what they didn't realize was for it to be truly adaptive, you need to feed it with a lot of content. And they just ran out of content because if you have different ways of teaching and different content and different speeds, there's a lot of branches in that tree, and filling that with content is not that easy. But the other thing is teachers are central in public schools. So when you're saying the platform and the AI will guide the student, the teacher who's been there for 30 years and kind of knows how to do stuff, she's like, well, what am I doing here then, right? So part of it is like the teacher felt that she was being disintermediated, and that affects adoption, right? And that affected kind of how successful it could be. Again, it's like AD and BC. This was before COVID. Now, I think suddenly you've come to a situation where it is possible that classrooms are not available and print textbooks aren't, warehouses are closed. So digital has to be a core part of your kind of strategy of teaching, and also like backup and insurance in case COVID-26 happens. But also, I think it's important from like with YouTube and TikTok, I've got 2 teenage boys. Like micro learning has never been as popular because that's now their attention span, right? It's nuggets of videos, it's 30-second videos, and 4-minute videos are the long form of videos, right? And I think just the way they consume and the way we consume information now needs to be broken down. So I think that fits really well with adaptive and online and chunking content and kind of some guidance. And then again, in higher ed education, to Stephen's point, it's a huge deal, right? Google has just said, we don't need you to have a degree anymore. We'll create our own career certificates. And as long as you've done well in that, we trust our interview process to get the best candidate. I don't need you to come out of an Ivy League, and I'll create my own program. Western governors, hugely popular, right? And they have competency-based education. They have mentors. They don't have instructions. And it's one of the fastest growing online universities in the US.
That really works well in technical. And I think there have even been dental and medical schools that have applied that sort of approach of proving competency, competency-based assessments. And I think that that's good. I think it's harder when you're a fan of liberal arts education to consider, that trend. And I think, being a well-rounded, educated individual is still very important. But there are a lot of people who are in education to get a job. And I think the trend is moving in that direction.
Yeah, but I think that's going to happen, right? I think as education becomes more expensive, the question is going to be asked saying, what am I getting for paying that much, right? And it is one thing to pay $60,000 for your kid and they're in college and you talk to them on the phone, depending on whether it's your son or daughter, how often you talk to them on the phone, they're having a good time, they're doing well, they're doing a great and all that stuff. It's another thing when they're in the next room on Zoom on their class, and then you're like, is this what I'm getting for $60,000? Are they going to get a job? So the question has started being asked, saying, what is the value of this at the end of this, right? And then it comes to job. And US News and World, which is kind of the rankings, they don't worry about jobs yet. But I think that will become important.
Well, yeah, yes and no, Shri. I tend to be with Christina. This being a philosophy major who's in a technical area, I will vouch for liberal arts education. But we see it when you get beyond education and into the science itself. So when we're talking about working scientists doing research, et cetera, there is an aspect in which these channeled algorithmic approaches to feeding information and discovery are creating or destroying serendipity in the scientific process. So I don't want to go down a rabbit hole on this entire thing, but education is one thing to say, okay, I'm training you for a job, but creating environments in which professionals are allowed to learn and discover is a slightly different proposition. So.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to separate between what I think is right versus what I think is going to happen. So pattern recognition, being able to connect disconnected things. I mean, Steve Jobs did everything he did because he had the liberal arts background and the design aesthetic along with the technology kind of knowledge, right? So I agree 100% that's what's going to happen. But as long as parents are paying for it, I grew up till I was 29 years old, I was in India, right? And the only thing that has been clear in India that will work for the last 25 years, any kind of business that you're going to start, is outcome-based businesses. If you have like SAT prep and their equivalent exams, parents will pay money, a lot of money for that. If I'm saying I'm going to just enrich you and enrich your skills and do that and stuff like that, they're not interested. And the reason they're not interested in it, it was really hard at that point to get a job, right? When opportunities are scarce, you want to maximize kind of your chances, right? If you want to buy as many raffle tickets as you can. And that's what it is. So I agree with you 100%. If I could have a philosophy major and I had a chance to interview him and recruit him for my job, who's also smart and thinks analytically, I would love to have that person. But if my kid wants to do liberal arts, I'm going to think long and hard about it. And I may even do it. But in aggregate, I think that's going to be harder and harder to kind of justify.
As a Soviet studies major, you know, Vladimir Putin's one of my favorite people again. But I do feel, I would say, in both my neighborhoods, my wife and I are the only liberal arts people on the block. I mean, it's all engineers. So, well, next is kind of I guess it's a little bit stating the obvious, but I do have a comment on this, but that the report states that the COVID pandemic has fueled digital publishing. And I, you know, I would agree. Our usage went through the roof. We gained a lot of new customers at Furyk. But I would say, not for everybody. There were some, and I work with a lot of professional organizations. There was a couple that nearly imploded and had some really tough times. So I don't think it's across the board. The report made it sound like for everybody, it was, you know, like the best thing that ever happened. But that isn't completely true in my opinion. But you know, it was people that were on the fence about, do we go digital or not? There are people like that still. There's no more thinking about it. They had to do it. But there were also, though, because of the pandemic, a lot of publication plans were put on hold, you know, wait and see till 2022. Instead of publishing 25 books, maybe we'll just do 5 this year. So it hasn't been across the board an explosion of the business in that term. But I'd like to know, you know, obviously how it's affected ASM and IEEE the last 18 months.
So if you didn't already have your instructor resources available digitally and your ebooks in the correct distribution channels, it was a difficult 2020 transition, because very quickly the educational institutions that we work with, higher learning and graduate schools, had to turn on a dime. They were very it was a crisis, to be honest with you. And that continued into the fall semester. We saw a lot of students deciding to delay their education in favor of waiting it out, either for safety purposes or for the experience they wanted to have was not going to be the one that was offered. So I would say we saw print sales decline dramatically in 2020, but they've rebounded since then. I think the vaccination availability, at least in North America, has made gathering again at universities this fall more possible, and you know, things are getting a little bit more back to normal, but they've changed forever. And now the pressure especially is on our content creators to reimagine how our content can be offered online. And so we're looking for creative ways, and creative ways used to be, oh, well, we'll put a video on there. Well, we have tons of videos, and certainly the instructors use them a lot in 2020, looking for ways to teach. But now we have to be even more creative, and it's a challenge. It's a challenge. And I think for me, the limiting factor is the digital, the product that I can put the content on. I'm having trouble finding the right structures. I wish everybody was using the same learning management system across the world so that we would know what kind of test banks to create, what kind of interactivity they wanted for those materials. I think that's really hard. Finding the right platform and the right outlets for the content is, I think, a lot more challenging than creating the content in the first place. So I don't know, what did you find, Stephen, in the past year and a half?
Well, yeah, I mean, the big effect on our business has been IEEE puts between 1,500 and 2,000 conferences together a year. So that means at any given time, there are 3 or 4 IEEE conferences going on simultaneously somewhere in the world. So if you imagine that's a lot of people getting together, and a lot of the reason that IEEE exists is that level of fellowship and collaboration. So that's a piece of the business that kind of disappeared on us, or had to pivot rapidly into an online environment, similar to what you're describing with classrooms, Christine. But we weathered that storm. I mean, we did appropriate use of existing technologies, and I think that we're hoping that 2022 we'll see some in-person stuff come back. But it did reveal to us, I think, a missing piece of technology platforms right now, and that is in collaboration, particularly that we can replicate the delivery of content of conferences in a virtual environment, but we can't replicate the hall room conversations and the give and take, and we can't archive the kind of Q&As and video content that we could get from a conference in the past. So I think that's a big change for us, and something that the challenge that we're looking for technology partners to meet for us is, how do we create those digital spaces that aren't just clunky, drag your avatar around and have cocktails with somebody, that don't really work. I mean, real collaborative spaces. I want to echo something that you said, Christine. I think that the pressure is really on content creators in a couple of areas around education that we see. We have a K through 12 program at IEEE. That's a part of our mission, is to get kids interested in STEM STEM careers, but STEM topics in general. We call it try engineering, and that's really building curriculum tools for teachers to adopt in their classroom. And a lot of them have been hands-on, but then of course the hands-on disappeared. So instead of building blocks and building a robot, etc., what are the ways that we can engage that cohort digitally and remotely when needed. And then finally, a point that you made, and I wanted to make too, in one of these parts, is you mentioned about integrating with the learning management system. Integrations is an issue across the board that's been revealed during the pandemic, is that we've got a lot of options and none of them talks to each other, whether it's peer review structures or educational structures. So we're very interested in people building software platforms that are modular or easily integratable with existing standards.
I think we're starting to get some questions. Let's see, we have a question from Al Noor. How will the explosion in remote learning be affected by the digital divide? For example, in rural communities and in developing countries. Something Christine and I were talking about yesterday. You want to take a shot at that, Christine?
Well, like Stephen, we do a lot of professional development for laboratorians in the clinical microbiology space. And ASM has a large global public health program where we go into developing countries and visit the small labs and do the training and train the trainers to keep the education going. And internet is just not available. I mean, doctor's visits are sometimes a one-day walk. It's a difficult situation. There is a digital divide. And I think it is urgent that everyone get internet access. Now, the availability of cell phones, more people have cell phones, I think is a key to helping with that. But what we're finding is our clinical microbiology resources and references still need to be in print for these places. A small lab in Africa, for instance, will share books and be able to access the information. It's a shame that they don't have the access to the online version of those so that they can keep up to date in the practices, but it's you know, that's as good as they can do. And it does limit the learning, it does limit the doing, and it does limit the infection control that we can help with. That's been our experience. I know that through working with our staff in global public health. I'm not as familiar with other areas about the digital divide.
Yeah, it's obviously a problem. IEEE is very engaged globally with its foundation work in the Global South, particularly involved in power and energy issues, involved in information access issues as well. So we're very sensitive to that. From a publishing perspective, I totally agree with Christine's assessment that those access issues are there. We think it's critical that things be now developed mobile first, so to take advantage of the increased reach that mobile has over a wired world. So we're hopeful that almost everyone will pick that up, so that we don't have that significant difference there. But from a content perspective, there's an issue here too. It's not simply just access to the internet, but it's the appropriateness of the resources that are provided from a content perspective. The same problems in Bolivia are different from the problems in Arizona and around. So the solutions and resources we bring to a solar field, projects bottlenecks is different in the two places. One is having supply chain issues. One is having personnel problems. So how do we get the right problem-solving information to people in the appropriate settings is almost as big a challenge as this digital divide issue, I think.
Sri, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm a bit hopeful here. I think the fact that there is a divide is pretty clear. But again, the fact that now I can actually be an engineer, but work out of my parents' house in the village, and I don't have to be in a big city, as long as I have a good connection and I have access, means I might also possibly be able to do other things around it. And maybe there's some opportunities there that I can do a startup. Like anything you do initially, if they don't, a lot of it is economics, right? I can give them really compelling stuff, but how will they pay for it? I mean, you see that playing that in the pharma industry all the time. There's like, I have this life-saving drug that I spent R&D. I get 20 years of patent protection in the US. I can't do that in Africa. So that, okay, either an Indian drug company then gives a version through process patents and their laws are slightly different, or it's just somebody has to do something philanthropic to kind of get them things like that. And we have one of our customers, Help Me See, and Help Me See was a nonprofit that was founded by this person who started a company called Flight Safety. It's now a Berkshire Hathaway company. It's a $2 billion company. They have flight simulators, and their job is they train private airline pilots, right? So anybody's flying a corporate Cessna or like a Learjet or something, they train them. They have these $12 million flight simulators. One of the things that they realized in the medical field is people in developing nations and poorer countries have a lot of cataracts, and some of it can be solved by cataract surgeries. The problem is, how do you train doctors to do those surgeries in those kind of remote areas? You can do that. So they've developed simulators that they can use to perform cataract surgeries and do that. And we're helping them with another digital material around that. But it took a philanthropic effort on somebody's part to kind of do that. So a lot of it will be regulation. A lot of it will be individual people and entrepreneurs kind of taking the lead in all these places. But the rails will be provided by like satellite-based internet access and kind of equity initiatives and things like that. And once you have the rail, then I think it will start kind of getting addressed.
And I go back to the challenge there is the point of care and the instruction on how to do a cataract surgery in Congo is different from the instructions and the how to do cataract surgery in Phoenix, Arizona hospital, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's the content piece that I don't think that we've figured out yet. I mean, we can figure out some of these technical pieces, but both are a challenge.
100%, yeah. So a lot of what they're doing is actually done with doctors in India, in the villages and stuff like that, because I think even if they didn't know it starting in Stephen, when they started, they realized, oh, okay, I came in, now my eyes are wide open where they weren't. But that is what, to a point, I'm saying it has to be localized, right? So you have to get a local person, like do it. Like Sequoia has now a thriving, well, till 2 months ago, they had a thriving operation in Sequoia, China, and they have Sequoia, India, and they have these things. But as a venture capital firm, big firm investing, their staffs are completely local in both those places, because they're saying, sitting out here in Silicon Valley, we don't know what's going on. We know macro trends, but you guys know kind of who the entrepreneurs are, what the situation is. So it will largely be locals who provide the solutions to bridge the digital divide. But it will still need some amount of enabling and some amount of kind of importing of stuff, so you can just fast track, I guess, some of those solutions more than just try to just slightly modify them.
We have another question from Bun Me. Will the format of publishing digital books remain the same, or is there a possibility that we might rethink the way we publish some books, especially when we apply learning experience design principles in this regard?
Yeah, we're going to have to change, right? And I think, as I said, I'm limited by the technology that's available to me to use with the content that we have. We used to think that PDFs were great. You know, here's your digital PDF book, right? But, and then we got what we call hot links or live links in the PDF that actually went out, and, you know, you could go over to click your resource, your reference, and go see that in real time. There could be links in there. There could be, you know, send them off to a website as you're reading the book. But that's where kind of we've stopped. I mean, we have EPUBs that adjust for different reading surfaces and things like that. But we go to the trouble of creating a lot of content digitally. Like, we have XML for all of our stuff. Now, what can we do with it that's better, right? How do we apply these data sets to ways that help? So we did talk about adaptive learning. You know, that's one way that we could present new things, but there's got to be other ways. And I think that's where the challenge is for publishers, to continuously learn, to continuously be in touch with the technology vendors that are developing, you know, new ways to use that XML and present it for the students, for the instructors, or for the person who needs it for their workflow. That's my challenge, I think. Stephen, what are your findings?
Yeah, well, I'll pick up right where you left off there. I think that in a larger sense, the workflow issue is the one that's operative. That is, books are really good at being books. Journal articles are really good at being journal articles, and they have a purpose. They are the correct output for an academic or scholarly activity, is to create an artifact of that type. Now, the problem is they don't fit every use case really well, and most use cases are multifaceted. So an engineer trying to solve the particular problem in front of her, or the student trying to learn comprehensively an issue in microwave technology, are two different use cases, but both right now have the option of turning to the same book to figure it out. I think what we need to see is technology that integrates these forms, not breaks the forms, but pulls them together in unique ways, so that a piece of a journal article, a chapter from a textbook, and the commentary on a monograph might all be useful to that person in that particular instance. And that's that kind of discovery and surfacing challenge that our new systems are going to have to do. It's not about the book, whether the book changes, it's whether or not our interaction with our entire data ecosystem will change and be very much more use case specific. That's where I think everyone is heading, specifically because we need to create value in our industry in an open movement, in an era of open access. So, value will come from the functionality, from our ability to curate, our ability to recommend, et cetera, and not from the underlying text that we're going to deliver. So I think that there's two reasons. One is that's the future because people need it that way, and that's the future because the business models are driving the publishers that way.
That's exactly right. I mean, as publishers, I think our jobs are to separate noise from signal. There's a lot out there. Those discovery systems are so essential. It was so exciting when the library started using discovery systems for all their content, to aggregate it, separate it, make it discoverable. And still, as a publisher, I want to follow that stream. I want to make sure that we get credit for the authors, credit for the publishers, through all those different channels that bring it together. And I think that's a big challenge. Is we're hoping that blockchain would be something that could help us hold on to that content as it travels in different places and still get the credit that's needed. And I think that's a challenge. So I'll stop there.
I think there's lots of interest. I mean, I found it funny last year when my kids were doing completely remote and people started talking about asynchronous learning, which is this highly technical term, but Furyk has been doing asynchronous learning for the last 20 years because one part of our business is developing custom courses for enterprise. So companies like IKEA or like Philips, somebody says, they go to libraries when they want to do general training, like Microsoft Office training or something like that. But when they have a specific system or they have specific processes or product training, it's custom content. They want to convert it into e-learning and put it on their learning management system. So they come to us and say, hey, can you work with your instructional designers and create an e-learning course, right? Which is a question that was asked. And in asynchronous, what you're dealing with is the learner and the machine, right? There's no intermediation. There's no classroom instructor seeing whether somebody's eyes are glazing over and maybe. So essentially what happens is if you're a good teacher and you have 30 learners sitting in front of you, you kind of can carry the class with you if you're really good at what you do, right? You know when they're paying attention, you know some people are always going to raise their hand and contribute. You know some of them are on the verge of tuning out. And after 15 minutes, you might say, let's take a break, let's do this exercise. After 30 minutes, 5 minutes, you say, hey, what do you guys think? And let's take a poll. So there are these things that they do to make it interactive and make it engaging and see that you're carrying everybody. Now the e-learning course on the LMS has to do all the work, right? So when an instructional designer designs it, they have to put in a mini break every 5 screens, and they have to put in interactive templates every 10 screens, maybe some games, maybe something. And the idea is that that they can shut down the machine and walk away at any time. You want to hold them. But again, there's only so much you can do, because ultimately, if you look at any learning management system, it will have functionality for your manager to send a reminder email saying, oh, by the way, you better finish your course by the end of the week. That's my deadline. So there's a level of compliance, even on like mission critical training, that's needed. So it's exactly right. I mean, I'm dating myself, but I remember the old days of like myyahoo.com, when you could create your own homepage. And I think, Christine, that's what you're talking about. It's once you can tag every piece of content and make it discoverable, you have amazing algorithms and recommendations engines in TikTok and YouTube and Netflix, where people just binge watch and they're there because their recommendation engines are able to process so much data, and they kind of know what you might find. If you saw this might be interesting. That applied to education could really kind of make it interesting. But again, when you think about it, 30 years ago, we always needed, beyond the people who are really motivated, like Matt Damon in Good Will Hunting, or like you're doing like graduate studies, you always needed a teacher or an instructor to tell you. With the internet, everything is out there. So now the content has to do more of the work, and I guess discovery systems and like recommendation engines and contextual stuff has to happen more automatically.
Well, since we're trying to decode the digital future here, what changes do each of you see happening over the next 6, 7, 8 years in your own digital publishing space?
Go ahead, Christine.
I think half the world thinks print is going to go away forever and we'll never see another print book. And the other half is like, but wait, I need it. So I think publishers, I'll just take the book publisher perspective. I think we have to continue to innovate. We have to continue to offer content at the place where the person goes looking for it, which is what Stephen said. It's basically, we have to be somewhere with our content. And I don't know exactly what forms it's going to take, but we must continue to generate content, high quality content, vetted content. That I think that's the role of our society for sure, is to make sure that facts are facts and their critical thinking skills are learned, data interpretation skills are learned. I mean, those are critical for us. And having the content at the place of consumption is going to be our challenge. I really do, because bad information is easy to find. And good information that's been vetted and should be easier to distribute globally than it is at present. So ways that we can make that happen, ways that we can have structures that enable content to flow from vetted sources to the points of need, I think will be the change, at least that I'm hoping for.
Yeah, great. I couldn't agree more that, and I think basically I've already said it, the point of view, bringing, resources to bear at the point of use is the challenge ahead of us. It's both how we're going to build value and it's what's being demanded of us in an increasingly open access future. I think we will begin to de-emphasize some of the pieces of puzzle that we've had in the past, which is, I think I saw pop up in the chat, a question about protecting our IP. And so I think we will begin to de-emphasize certain aspects around authentication and entitlement systems that are, playing whack-a-mole to a certain extent with our audience. So that might diminish some. And I do want to re-emphasize integration of content formats is going to be critical. Right now, a lot of the content world, whether journals or books or preprints or the like, are built around very stable and established metadata structures, and they don't necessarily talk to each other. So I think that's going to be a big puzzle for us to solve if we're going to create these conglomerated or more mixed format products, including video and images. Normalizing data, metadata is going to be a challenge in the near to midterm for us. I know that the next part of this question, Scott, I know is going to be what doesn't change, and that I'm going to have to say is I'm in complete agreement with Christine. From our society's perspective, the IEEE is dedicated to advancing technology for the benefit of humanity, and we are going to double down on quality and integrity in our content. We believe that there is a lot of noise out there, as Christine points out, and I completely agree with you. But if we're going to hold value and we're going to fulfill our mission, we need to stay true to the stuff that we're producing, not play a clickbait game, and not just compete for people's attention, but produce high quality content. And we think that will ultimately still win.
We hope.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was internally having this discussion just the last week within our company with a couple of people, and it was interesting to me, right? I mean, you look at traditional publishers, Wolters Kluwer's, ASM, or if you look at like Cengage or McGraw-Hill or Pearson. To me, at some point, they performed the role of like a Neiman Marcus did, where if I had the money, but also if I went into that store, if there was a designer there that I hadn't heard of, I took a couple of things for granted. That A, it's probably a luxury brand, right? And it's a well-known designer with quality. And B, they probably it was in vogue and the style was right and things like that. So essentially, publishers, especially respected publishers who've been there for more than 100 of years, you're seen as curators and arbiters of what is valuable content, right? To kind of do what I'm done. And I think that role is certainly a critical role because, yeah, you can do open access and anybody can publish a paper. But the thing about peer review and editing it and getting it and asking the right questions and questioning the data and do that, somebody needs to do it, and it costs time and effort and money to do it. So yes, to some extent, now with the internet and white papers and Substack, everybody can become a digital publisher, and to some extent people are, right? Like if you look at things like General Assembly and Substack, people were writing newsletters and earning millions of dollars through some of those things. But when they do that, to your point, Christine, then who gives it the stamp of authenticity and saying, this is good versus this is bad? Which is also critical, right? Because at some point, if you don't do that with your algorithm and recommendations, you can be in this completely parallel universe, right? When you listen to Walter Cronkite, that was 30 minutes of curated news, versus I can pick whichever 24-hour channel I want, and then that's my universe. So I think it's critical to kind of, I'd be very curious and interested to see how that plays out, where everybody can publish content and do that. But again, does that mean Cengage Unlimited tries to get them under their Big 10 and get independent publishers because they don't have to pay them royalties, or maybe they can keep more of it? But versus, does somebody just put it out there and it's kind of, people just do likes, and if it's got 1 million likes, it is assumed through social proof that it's a good piece of content. So it would be, at least in the educational space. So I'd be very curious to see how that plays out. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I think you're seeing publishers place different bets on what the future is going to be. I mean, there are major publishing houses that that are over a century old that have decided that the content ownership and the copyright ownership piece of the business is really not the future, and that publishing services are the future, and putting together and vertically integrating a publishing services company is what they want to do on behalf of other content owners, which is a strange choice in my estimation, and certainly not one that IEEE is going to go down. It's not part of our mission to do that, but we'll stick with the content is king for a little while and go with that.
Yeah, and I think that technology providers are challenged with coming up with ways for us to use their tools appropriately with our vetted content.
I think we have time for one more question we have from our audience. Do publishers need to have an audience strategy to reach readers on multiple digital platforms?
Well, you need to know where your markets are looking and reading and buying. Okay, you need to know what your market needs and where they are, where they're looking for it. So, I mean, that's the big challenge for any big publisher. There's so many choices out there for where to put your content. Where's the need? I don't know if that answers the question. Maybe Stephen has a better.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I mean, the challenge for those of us like Christine and I who are in society publishing, where the activity that we're doing, the output of our program is just the output of our society's activity, is a little different from a commercial publisher who is producing the content for the purpose of selling it. And so I think we have a slightly different challenge there. We're trying to monetize something that we're going to produce, whether anybody buys it or not. versus somebody who's who's producing it simply to be bought. And right now, I think we're satisfied with our audience being happy to come and purchase our stuff in the academic setting and in the commercial and in the the industry setting in the right spots.
Great, thank you. Well, as they say, the old clock on the wall says it's our time is up. I want to thank my panel very, very much. I thought this was great. Even this old guy learned a few things today, so thank you very much. We hope this has helped our listeners gain a bit of clarity on the decoding the future of digital publishing. Should you have any questions about digital content, platforms, online learning for your society, association, or publishing house, please check our award-winning website, Furyk.com, to learn more how we help manage it all securely. Or, thanks to my producer, Bala, you can tweet us at Furyks_digital. Also want to just mention, you see in the background, if you haven't, check out our H Society podcast. We usually drop episodes every Friday. And you can see, in fact, some of our illustrious guests that have been and will be on the podcast. Thanks again. I thought this was great. Everyone stay safe, healthy, and thanks again to our panel and all our listeners. And we'll be back again, I'm told, very soon with another panel discussion webinar. Thank you and take care.
Thank you.